Hey everybody, welcome to Bold TV. We are going to be talking about Afghanistan's bombing, the massive story, the massive bomb. We want to hear your comments. I mean, this is a hot topic.
You're so serious right now.
I mean, it is. It's
let's jump right in. You want to tell them your name?
Well, we got to make sure that everybody knows what we're talking about. So that everybody, because we know that you're very passionate about foreign affairs. So make sure you get your comments up and going.
I'm Clay Aiken. This is Carrie Sheffield.
Yes.
And it's Good Friday on
You're
Bold.
back after being on the road for 2 weeks. All the Clay mates, I know you guys are happy because you missed this one. And he's back.
I'm here. And, mostly, not mentally, but I'm here physically.
Well, it's Easter weekend. You'll be here in New York
Yes,
for Easter, so that's good.
You have big Easter plans?
I don't know yet. I'll probably go to. I've been going to St. Bart's.
What? Wait, you're going to leave and go to St. Bart's? What, today?
No, as in it's like on Park Avenue.
Oh. I thought you were going to just hop a plane and go to St. Bart's.
The country. Oh, whoops.
I was like, I'm coming too, girl.
I'll fit him in my suitcase.
So I've been gone for 2 weeks, and it seems like this first week I'm back, the bottom fell out, right?
It's because you left, Clay.
Well, no. It's because I came back. And they said, let's have a good news week for them to talk about on Friday. Whole bunch of stuff is happening. What's the biggest story of the things that have happened this week? And there have been several. What do you think is the big one?
I think the Afghanistan bomb dropping was the most historic moment because this is the biggest, most massive bomb drop aside from nuclear weapons in human history. So that's the biggest story as far as I'm concerned. Really? But I think that there's so many other ones like Trump is basically completely doing a 180, which as a conservative, I'm thrilled because the guy on the campaign trail was driving me nuts about retreating from American responsibility, slapping down NATO, and now he's saying NATO is actually a good thing. And he just named a friend of mine, Rick Grinnell, to be the NATO ambassador, or he's got to be confirmed. But Rick is a serious, reasonable, normal, nice guy. And I'm proud of him. So he's moderating. President Trump is moderating. I think that's the biggest headline.
Yeah, well, okay, well, girl, you are schizophrenic this morning. That's the biggest headline. Which one is it? Make up your mind. First is Afghanistan. I'm going to talk about the Afghanistan bombing because, it's a big story, but to me, I feel like it is a little bit overblown by the news media in how big it is. I mean, the truth is, this was not even the type of mission that had to get the go-ahead from Donald Trump, from the president, in order to happen. I mean, he gave the generals the leeway to make the decisions about what was important to do. It's something that CBS News has been reporting has been in the planning and been in the works since Obama was president. And it was not, although the president certainly was involved and knew it was going to happen, he didn't have to pull the trigger, so to speak, on this. So I don't know that. I think the fact that they call it the mother of all bombs, the fact that it was a large bomb, is a big deal. But what did they say the tonnage of it was? It was 21,000 pounds. Yep. But let's be honest, if they had dropped 21 individual 1,000-pound bombs, we wouldn't be talking about it.
That's what the Tomahawks are, about 1,000 pounds.
Yeah, but we wouldn't be talking about it.
5 of those in Syria.
Right, but we wouldn't be talking about it as news if they had done 21 of those, because I think the reason that it's big news is because it had a really catchy title.
The branding was there.
The branding of the bomb, and it was large.
#M.O.A.B.
Right.
M.O.A.B. Being from Utah, there's M.O.A.B., which is where National Park is. Beautiful. You should check it out.
I still think, I mean, we haven't even, I mean, I still think that I'm surprised to hear that you're excited about him moderating, because while I'm sure that there are some parts of his moderation that have satisfied you, pulling away from the world, there are certainly other things that I don't think I'm surprised. What about his stance on Janet Yellen and the Fed, and how he hated her before, but now he likes her? You're thrilled with that? You're a business girl.
Janet Yellen is on her way out the door. And the thing is,
I don't know, he said that he might keep her.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, she's her term ends next year. And actually,
he's got to appoint a family member, obviously.
Yeah, I know.
Jared Kushner's gonna need something to do.
He's gonna be the Fed. Melania will be the Fed chair. I mean, why not? No, but actually, he gave an interview with the Wall Street Journal on fiscal issues, and he sounded, in my mind, very reasonable. I mean, he's walking back a lot of the angry, just bluster during the campaign, which, if you took him seriously, which I think that was what I was doing and a lot of people were doing, then, what he's doing now is a complete reversal of a lot of the things that he was talking about. And I'm glad about that.
How is that going to affect him with those people who voted for him and who spent so much of their energy rallying to his side? The base, the far right, Ann Coulter has said some things on Twitter recently, not too thrilled with him. Quite a few of the folks who are on the far right have not been very thrilled. Steve Bannon, as we know, is kind of teetering on the brink of existence in the White House. And if he were to go, how does this moderation affect him with that base, do you think?
Well, I think that a lot of what he was doing on the campaign trail was just pulling the ZOPA, the zone of possible agreement, just moving the stakes of the negotiation. That's what happens when you're negotiating, is you pull it out as far as you can, and then you move to the middle. That's what deal making is about.
Yeah, but I think every candidate does that to some extent. But
Exactly.
these are some, certainly, you campaign in poetry, govern in prose. But these have been some pretty drastic flips.
But at the same time, are they flips, or was he talking out of both sides of his mouth? Because I think
What's
that
the
was
difference?
bothering me.
What's the
Well, no.
difference?
So, for example, he said Trump on the campaign trail, in one paragraph, he can completely contradict himself in 3 different ways. So, he said, for example, we're going to bomb the S out of ISIS. And then he also said, we're going to intervene, we're not going to intervene, and we're not going to be the world's policeman. He said all of those things, which is why so many people projected everything onto him.
Right, but then he went and did it. So what is that going to do to his base? I mean, these people who want to be isolationists, who were thrilled with that, who did not want to be the world's policeman, so to speak, if, one thing happens, and listen, as a progressive, I'm glad that we are trying to do what we can to protect women and children and innocent people who are being, terrorized by their dictator. But if that happens and immediately his response is to bomb them, how does that affect his standing with those people? And if that falls away, and then his NATO stance falls away, and then his position on all these other things fall away, Steve Bannon, I think that they've talked a lot about the wrangling that's going on within the White House between Steve Bannon and that faction of advisors, and Ivanka, Trump and Jared Kushner and that more moderate globalist group of advisors. And one of the things that I think I've read that Steve Bannon is trying to say is, listen, if you lose that far right base, Mr. President, that's fine. You'll appease the moderates in the Republican Party, and you might even appease some moderate Democrats. But those moderate Democrats aren't going to vote for you, no matter what.
I just don't think that, and Joe Scarborough has made this point excellently, Donald Trump does not need Steve Bannon to win the White House or to keep the far right. He's been singing that populist songbook for 30 years. So Joe Scarborough showed this clip of Donald Trump talking about the nationalist populist rhetoric way back in 1979. So he doesn't need the Steve Bannon whisperer, and that's part of the problem apparently, is that Steve Bannon was trying to take credit for Trump's victory. So I think that Donald Trump is obviously an amazing orator. I think he'll be able to do that slippery pivot. I mean, he's an amazing politician. I think he'll figure out how to get those people back. But also the fact that I don't think that he's going to, by moderating, he's not going to motivate the liberal base. That was the reason why a lot of people actually showed up to vote against him. But Nancy Pelosi,
he's going to motivate
you've got
the liberal
Nancy.
base. The liberal base is not going to lose their moderation. Before we go any further, we've got a lot of stuff to talk about when it comes to international stuff. Carrie has obviously had her caffeine this morning, and since you're looking over there at our guest and making everybody at home think, wait, what is she looking at? We might as well bring in our guest. We were supposed to have Congressman Espiat today. He had other things come up, but we are actually, I think, luckier because we've got a guest who knows so much about this this interplay and the dynamics in the Middle East and in all of the world. And so Asha Castleberry is here with us. She's a professor at Fordham University and a U.S. Army veteran. So we want to bring you in and thank you very much for being here with us today. And now people know where Carrie's looking when she's looking over there.
I'm looking at you, Clay.
Girl, you had not looked at me in 25 minutes. Welcome.
You hurt my eyes are too bright.
So there's a bunch going on this week, and we touched real briefly on Syria. Carrie, we touched on Afghanistan. We haven't touched on Russia and the dynamics between Secretary of State Tillerson's visit with Vladimir Putin. We haven't touched on North Korea. How do you feel in a general sense? You know the world. You were stationed in Kuwait and Iraq and Jordan. You know the Middle East. How do you feel this week about all that's going on militarily, diplomatically, with this administration in the world?
Well, there are several different things I feel right now. But with regards to the strikes that happened in Syria, I saw a different reaction in different ways. I will tell you that in the Middle East, especially among our allies, there has been a sense of folks that were actually happy about the strike. They were happy that President Trump actually initiated the strike due to the fact that they want to see more aggression towards the Bashar al-Assad regime. If you want to break it down, of course, in the Gulf region, they were in favor of it, as well as Egypt, and in Jordan, which has been experiencing an overwhelm of security and economic issues due to the Syrian crisis, and King Abdullah is not in favor of Bashar al-Assad. But then there's this other piece to it too. As far as the strategy in place, it's not as coherent. It come across somewhat incoherent due to the fact that, okay, we know for a fact that ISIS is the priority, but now when it comes to countering Bashar al-Assad, is that a coherent strategy? Is that a coherent decision? It comes across as if you look at Nikki Haley, yes, we are against the Bashar al-Assad regime, but then with the other officials on the administration, it kind of doesn't
come. The message is a little bit. Can
right.
you, because you know this, so if you don't, can you help me and everyone understand why Russia's relationship with Syria, why our actions in Syria affect our relationship with Russia, and why we need to be worried about that dynamic right there? Because obviously, if this was just an issue where Syria and Bashar al-Assad were committing these atrocities in isolation, there might not be that diplomatic dance that has to be danced. But since Russia is an ally, can you talk to us about their relationship?
Oh, of course. I mean, Russia has an established relationship with Syria going back 50, 60 years. Even before Bashar al-Assad with his dad, Russia has invested so many resources and assets in Syria. They've had their biggest naval port. They've had so many diplomats there. When the Syrian crisis broke out, you had over 400 Russian diplomats evacuated out of Syria. I mean, they've invested a lot of resources in Syria.
This is not just a Vladimir Putin is taking the side of someone who the U.S. hates for the sake of making us angry. This is a long-term alliance that they've had. They're long-time allies.
Oh, absolutely. And you saw that play out, I think, during 2011 at the UN. When during the Security Council, the United States was trying to pass a resolution to condemn the Bashar al-Assad regime under Ambassador Susan Rice. But unfortunately, China as well as Russia had blocked that, in Russia mainly because of their strategic interests in Syria.
And Asha, I want to ask, so we had a couple comments here. Kathy Malamut says, how about we discuss those pesky Russia ties that you keep ignoring, Carrie? Kathy, we're going to talk about those right now. And Denise Halliday Koch says, I feel all this dialogue is a way for the president to distract from the issues of the Russian influence in our government. So I want to tie those comments together and ask you, Asha, is this robust response against Syria a way of basically smacking down and saying, I'm my own guy. I don't need Vladimir Putin. This bromance is unhealthy, and we're going to be America first.
It's definitely come across a tougher diplomacy, and it's new. During the presidential elections, we didn't foresee this kind of action, and then on top of that, it happened within 48 hours. So it's what we call a 180 strategy. But another thing too you want to take into account is it's different as far as it shows that the United States supports against human rights violations, which we didn't really hear about during the presidential elections too as well. So tougher diplomacy, and on top of it, if you think about where these strikes occurred, it's around Bashar al-Assad's strongholds. So that's new as well. Our airstrikes have always been, targeting ISIS in Syria. But now that you're coming across where I'm not afraid to target strongholds that are controlled by Bashar al-Assad with Russian troops, that brings in a different dynamic. So it definitely is going to attract a lot of attention and impact a lot of people's view about it, about where are we with this.
So how do you diplomatically, militarily, how do you stop a dictator in a country that is allied with another country who you also have issues with? And, are you more worried about Bashar al-Assad and ISIS, or do we need to be just as worried about Russia?
Well, I will tell you this. I don't think the media is really talking about this too much, but the United States, I think right now feels that Bashar al-Assad, his strength right now in Syria is eroding. When under President Obama, especially in 2013, Bashar al-Assad he was a lot stronger as far as troops, assets, resources. But if you look at the war over the last 6 years, he's lost a lot of territory, a lot of resources.
Is that true though? Because it seemed like just as like 2 weeks ago, President Trump had resigned himself and said the Syrian people will decide whether they want to keep Assad in power. It seemed like we were just going to give up. Is that not true?
No, I think right about now Russia is getting to the point where they're convinced that Bashar al-Assad is going to eventually go.
So will they help him, or they?
No, actually, what are some covert discussions going on? I think they know he's going to eventually go, and they're actually word of mouth as far as speculation. They're looking for someone to replace him along with Iran.
Yeah.
Yes.
Asha, I want to ask you, we have a question here from Sabrina Adams. She says, what about the U.S. accidentally killing 18 of the Allied forces in Tabaka? You've been on the ground. It's chaos. As they call it, the fog of war. In your experience, 18 civilians being killed by American forces, how does something like that happen, and how would we mitigate against that?
Well, you have to look at the rules of engagement and the strategy. So if it goes along with the rules of engagement, that means there's a justification why it happened, especially if the host nation allows it to happen. So there's more to it, but it probably goes along with the rules of engagement, so it's probably necessary.
Carrie makes a good point about chaos. She says it's on the ground. I think it's in the White House. But who's making the decisions? Is Rex Tillerson making decisions? Is President Trump making decisions? Is General Mattis, Secretary Mattis, is he making decisions? Do we have any idea? Can you tell, based on what we've done over the past week, a lot we've done this week, who's in charge?
Well, we've noticed for quite some time that POTUS actually values the interests of the general officers. I think General Mattis and the National Security Advisor has a lot going on where they're shaping his decisions very well.
John McMaster.
Yes, exactly. Even with the situation with NATO, the POTUS pretty much said that NATO is no longer obsolete. Well, General Mattis felt that way, and he has been very open about that. So I think there's a lot of shaping going on.
In fact, we just allowed a new member this week that Trump signed off on. Montenegro is now part of NATO. So you don't expand, you don't put a new wing on your kitchen if you're going to abandon the house.
Get rid of Bannon and bring in Montenegro.
Yes.
I know your expertise and your knowledge is largely based. You just spent 30 months in the Middle East, but you know a lot more about these types of things than I do. North Korea. North Korea is rearing its ugly head, especially in the last few days. Talks of them being able to test another nuclear test. Talks of them now being able to possibly have the ability to launch a missile with sarin gas that would reach Japan, and a leader that I would argue is even more unstable than Bashar. Why do I can't say his name? Bashar al-Assad. Do we need to be worried about North Korea? And is it right that the Trump administration is now talking about potentially launching a preemptive strike against them?
Well, I think the one major concern is the fact that we have been going to China as far as addressing North Korea. I think during the meeting between POTUS and the Chinese president, it came across as if China is kind of losing that control over North Korea. So if that is so, and China and we're failing to shape North Korea based on the deterrence in South Korea, then of course we would be worried. But you have this other argument too, that this behavior by North Korea has been consistent since the 90s, right? They tend to do things when they want attention. I personally feel that they enjoy the attention they're getting from the United States right now. They just recently said that they're not too pleased with our POTUS's tweets. So they're paying attention to a lot of stuff.
Join the club, North Korea.
And on top of that, they felt somewhat neglected when we were so inundated with the Middle East policy within the last 2 administrations. So they like attention, and their behavior has also shaped the fact that they're isolated. So engaging with them is very difficult. And if we're losing that with China, then we're going to have to think of another way to engage with them.
Well, it certainly seems like we've got a symbiotic relationship with China, where it's sort of this mutually assured economic destruction. If they do something to hurt us, they're going to hurt themselves, which is their incentive to help rein in North Korea and play their part in that way. But I want to talk about triangulation for a little bit in terms of, do you see kind of what's happening now as the new triangulation of what Henry Kissinger did with China versus Russia under Nixon?
Well, if you're talking about...
First of all, define that, because I fell asleep halfway through it. So.
Elaborate more. Elaborate more.
So the triangulation of Richard Nixon, which was led by Henry Kissinger, he was basically trying to pit Russia and China against each other.
Right.
And so by playing that spoiler, he made sure that they didn't have an alliance, but he also always kept them guessing, which was something that drove me nuts on the campaign with Donald Trump. But in terms of foreign affairs, isn't that what you want, to just kind of always keep your frenemies or your opponents kind of questioning and wondering what's happening?
Of course. I mean, and I think even China and Russia is aware that a possibility of that happening. If you recently saw the decision that came out with the resolution that was passed, that was brought to by Nikki Haley at the Security Council, China went along with Russia, right? They abstained, but China vetoed. Russia vetoed and China abstained. But at the end of the day, they know that, okay, we have to stick with each other when it comes to some of these key decisions. Because they were, one main reason they were not too pleased with what happened with the Gaddafi situation. But they're aware that can potentially happen. So I think that there's some more talking going on or working together.
All right. Well, thanks so much for your expertise.
And education.
Yes.
I like
Yes.
it when we have segments where we can have someone who can enlighten and educate, because
Yes.
Lord knows I need it. Asha Castleberry, thank you very much for joining us.
Yes. No, we appreciate your insight. It's always great. And as a professor at Fordham University and military veteran, we appreciate your service.
Thank you.
Thanks.